Hello, Jillian, and welcome back. It's so nice to have you on the show.
Hi, Grant. Nice to be here.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person next week in London, but in advance, we get this talk on Ayurveda. And I know you have so much insight and wisdom to share with us. So let's just start with sort of a simple definition of Ayurveda.
Yes, it's a term that we hear a little bit more about these days, although I do think there's quite a bit of confusion about what it is. So I think it's good just to sort of step back a moment and say, well, where does this come from and what is this? It is essentially an ancient system of natural healthcare, and it predates anything that we're really familiar with in the Western world or in the world. It goes back to the essence of what it means to be in balance mentally, physically, in alignment with nature. And it comes from a body of knowledge, which is called the Veda. So Veda is a Sanskrit term, and it means knowledge, pure knowledge, actually. Let's insert that word there just to give it some weight. Ayur, actually it's Ayus, but because it goes with Veda, we say Ayurveda. Ayur means life. So Ayurveda is the knowledge of life. And I always say, Ayurveda has something to say about everything, whether that be what time to eat or what kind of exercise is right for you, or, what spices are good to add to your cooking. It's got something to say about everything. And so this is knowledge of life and how we can stay in optimum health and balance in life. So this is knowledge that is 5,000 to 10,000 years old. It's from where we get Vedic meditation, comes from the Veda, and Ayurveda is a branch of that Vedic knowledge. It's very specific. And there are Vaidyas, who are wise Ayurvedic doctors who are able to guide people in this area. So interestingly, Ayurveda, whilst it has this rich history, and it comes from the place that we now know as modern day India, Indus Valley around here. This is where this knowledge, the Vedic knowledge, has been most effectively preserved over time. What was noted in about 1980 was that this revival of meditation, the Vedic meditation that you and I both practice and that I teach, that was starting to be reestablished. However, the knowledge of Ayurveda was kind of lost. This is knowledge that was being passed down in families from grandma to, the daughter and down to the little ones, but it was not, the knowledge was very much starting to dissipate and was not available in the mainstream in the way that it would ideally be, in the way that it would have been historically, just integrated in everything that people were doing. And so what happened is that the man that was responsible for reinvigorating the knowledge of meditation also was responsible for bringing together the old masters of Ayurveda and starting to re-enliven this knowledge. And so now we're in a situation where Ayurveda is something that, you can walk into many places and see reference to. You can go to some spa on holiday and they'll give you an Ayurvedic massage, or there's an Ayurvedic, chips at Whole Foods or something. There's ways that you can access this. Which is fantastic, although there's still a little bit of confusion about what it is. And I think because Ayurveda does have something to say about everything, it can feel a little bit overwhelming, because we're all busy. We've all got a lot going on. And I know in my own life, with a child, with businesses here in London and in New York, I need this knowledge to be able to be integrated into my very busy life in a way that's doable. And I think that's the really important thing, to be able to draw down on this ancient wisdom in a way that works for our busy lives.
I mean, that's what I love about your teaching, because actually with meditation, what you teach is, how can we integrate it into the everyday life and make it easy? So what are some easy tactics? And it sounds like it's the same thing with how you approach Ayurveda. I mean, I guess for many of us, we've heard about these terms, the doshas, or you might have some like online quiz, find out what your dosha is. And I know that has to do with Ayurveda. So maybe it's worth going into what those are and how we can maybe start to assess ourselves, if that's possible.
Yes. So the doshas apply to every aspect of life, including human beings, but it can be applied to the time of day. It can be applied to what season it is. And they refer to balancing agents. There are essentially 3 doshas that are identified in Ayurveda. These are Vata, V-A-T-A, Pitta, P-I-T-T-A, and Kapha, K-A-P-H-A. Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And these are psychophysiological balancing agents that can be found in every aspect of life. We come into the world having a baseline predominance of each of these to different degrees that give us our uniqueness. So somebody is born, they might be predominantly Vata, they might be predominantly Pitta, they might be sort of evenly Vata, Pitta, and a little bit of Kapha. And over time, what happens is that because we are affected by the season, here we're in London, we're going into autumn, we're going into what's known as Vata season. Then the key thing about Ayurveda is, how do you maintain your psychophysiological balance? And when we understand what our base makeup is and what our tendencies are in terms of getting out of balance, and also what's going on around us that will cause us to be out of balance, then we have knowledge that is very, very potent and very actionable. Because if I know that I have a predominance of one of these balancing agents, then I am able to adjust my diet or my routines in accordance with this concept of staying in balance. So let's just understand what we mean by Vata, Pitta, and Kapha a little bit more, because these 3 doshas represent, they reflect, I think would be a better way, the baseline elements in nature. So somebody who has a lot of Vata in them has a lot of the air and the space element. Somebody who has a lot of Pitta in them has more of the fire element in them and some of the water element. And somebody who has more of the Kapha has more of the earth and the water. So somebody who's got a lot of Pitta with that fire tends to have a very fiery digestion. They could have a fiery personality. They could be a bit quick to anger. They tend to be quite decisive. They tend to make very good leaders. They have that sort of drive. Often they're known as sort of the type A personality. Well, often they'll probably have quite a high predominance of Pitta in them. Somebody who is, let's say, a lot of the Kapha element, that's predominant in their psychophysiological makeup, will be somebody who has more of that earth, so the solid, more stable, maybe a bit slower. Their learning ability, how they take information in, might be a little bit more slow, however, in comparison to one of the other doshas, and yet once they get it, they retain it and they hold on to it, and they have that solid basis that is more lasting. Someone with a more predominance of Vata, this is the air, the ether, so there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of kind of creative and ping ideas, tendency towards maybe sleeping lightly, being very quick walkers, very quick speakers, very quick with their movements, a lot of movement in the system. So let's take one of these and workshop it to a little degree, because what this gives us information about is how we can stay in balance. This is a word that you're going to hear me say a lot in this talk, because and it gets used a little bit in a sloppy way, but balance is very important in life, because what we know is that our environment is ever changing. If we stay rigid, if we stay locked into a particular eating pattern or a particular exercise pattern or a lifestyle sort of routine, and we're not taking into account how circumstances are changing around us, the rigidity actually creates more disturbance and more imbalance. So being able to be adaptive and being in tune with what's going on in my psychophysiological makeup in relationship to the demands of life and the circumstances and the stage of life and the stage of the month and what the seasons are doing. All of these things we need to be able to navigate and hold in our awareness. So let's say here we are in the Vata season. Now, Vata means the primary qualities are it's dry, it's cold, and it's windy. That would be a good way to sum up the autumn or the fall season. Somebody who has a predominance of Vata is going to be more susceptible to the Vata season because there is like meets like. So they have a tendency to feel the cold. They have a tendency to dry skin. They have a tendency towards constipation. They have a tendency to get thrown off balance by lots of travel, lots of movement, lots of routines being out of whack. So in this season, that person needs to pay more attention to balancing Vata. That means, and this is a very important principle in Ayurveda, how do we balance Vata? Well, we do the opposite. So we bring in warmth. We have a hat and a scarf. We oil the skin, very important. Our biggest organ is our skin. So in Ayurveda, taking care of the skin through applying oil. This is a process known as Abhyanga, the self-massage, very important. And so there's dealing with the cold, dealing with the dry, and having stable routines, you know, sitting down, having that main meal at lunchtime, doing the things that are the opposite of what we would note in a Vata dominant environment or a Vata predominant psychophysiology. So this notion of opposites, you know, is very, very important. So for example, somebody who's got a lot of predominance of Pitta in their system, for them to sit down in the middle of the summer and have a very, very spicy curry, you know, and be in the midst of a really kind of fraught business meeting, what is that going to do? That is like meets like. They've already got a lot of fire. They've got a lot of heat in their system. How are they going to experience that? Well, that's not going to be balancing. That's going to be aggravating. And that's going to kick off their temper. Their maybe have a bit more of a short fuse. Their skin. Often we'll see this as an imbalance in Vata, a lot of sort of ruddiness or skin-related, heat-related issues. They might find a lot of acidity in their digestive system. Their system is digestion is out of balance, and we can talk more about digestion in a moment. So here we can see the like meets like. Somebody who's got a lot of that kapha, that heaviness, and they then have a tendency perhaps to be not moving, you know, because there's more that solidity, and they're eating, let's say, heavier foods, and they are not getting in the exercise program that they want. They might find that they have a tendency to gain weight very easily, difficulty losing weight, feeling a little bit sort of flat and down, hard to get motivated and enthusiastic to do stuff. These are the qualities where like meets like, and it just starts to exacerbate those elements, and it leads to further imbalances in the system, which ultimately is what we would say leads to disease. You know, and we can trace it back. So Ayurveda has something to say about all these things, and we can look at it from so many different angles. But does that give a starting point for us to kind of get a sense of the Vata Pitta Kapha? And we can dive in, of course. I think one of the things, and you mentioned this, was this, you know, and the dime a dozen, you can go online and you can do an Ayurvedic questionnaire and you can say, okay, what's my mind body type? I think the watch out with this is that whatever is going on in your psychophysiology at the time that you take the questionnaire will be reflected in your answers. And if you are out of balance, that imbalance will also show up. So it might look like you're very Vata predominant, but actually there is a Vata imbalance in your system, and that's what's being reflected in your answers. So we have to take that with a little bit of care, I think. What a Vaidya will do, when I meet Dr. Raju, who is my Ayurvedic doctor in India, he will take my pulse. And he will do that in a very specific way. It's the 3-point here, and it's Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and he will know what is going on in my physiology, what has happened, what is looking like in the future. He knows everything by taking a read on the Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And actually, he's less interested in, well, what is your makeup? He's like, well, what's out of balance? What do we need to bring back into balance? That's really what we need to look at. So I think that's just something to take into account.
Yeah. So in order to find out what your main dosha is, what's the best way? Would that be to go to a specialist, an actual Ayurvedic doctor?
I think if they are well trained and it's not spa Ayurveda, it's real Ayurveda, then yes, that's a good way. Okay. And there are different ways that they will look at your tongue. They will ask you, you know, an extensive range of questions about, you know, what's going on for you in terms of, you know, how you're consuming food, what you're eating, when you're eating, you know, what's your sleep like. They'll be able to tell a lot from looking at you and listening to you. If they are trained in pulse diagnosis, that will be the most profound read on what's going on. I'm not saying don't investigate, you know, via some sort of a questionnaire. It's okay. It's just bearing in mind that that's quite a sort of rudimentary evaluation, and it won't yield as accurate a result, although it may certainly, you know, if you start to investigate this a little bit more, you can see, oh, well, yes, you know, let's say there's a couple and they're sleeping, and one person sleeps and they've got both their feet out of the bed and they're throwing the covers off, and, you know, there's somebody that tends towards heat, and then the other person on the other side of the bed has sort of got their socks on and, you know, is all covered up, and, you know, then that person.
It's like you have a video into my room because I'm the really hot one all the time, and Tommy, it's like, oh my God, like breathing all the time.
Yeah. So there you've got the Pitta, he's got the Vata.
Yeah.
So he's going to feel the cold more quickly than you are. And there you are just walking around with a t-shirt, and he's got 3 layers on going, why are you, you know, what's going on here? And, you know, if you miss lunch, you're going to be like, you know, everyone's going to know it. And he could quite easily sail through, I didn't have lunch, you know, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, because he's being caught up in something, and he's moving and his mind's moving, and he's Mr. Vata and he's off. So you can start to identify some of these things quite simply. It's really...
It sounds like a lot of it is about developing this self-awareness of what's happening in your body. Obviously, you have a tendency to one thing, but then can you look at what's happening on a day-to-day basis to see how things are changing?
Yes. And, you know me, everything comes back to consciousness. You know, how aware are you? Yeah. And, you know, in Ayurveda, there's this beautiful saying. It says, don't say no, as in no, don't eat that, or do eat this, you know, everybody should eat this. And no, it doesn't say that. Don't say no, say no, K-N-O-W. No. Know what is right for you in this moment, in this climate, at this time of day, at this stage of your life, at this time of the month. Having just been in that meeting, having just traveled, no. And that is awareness, and that is self-awareness. And so Ayurveda would say, well, the primary way to be conscious, the grounding technique is meditation, of course, because without that self-awareness, we don't have access to it. We are completely disconnected from our fine level of feeling. We are stressed and we are tired. And so then any capacity to have a sense of self-awareness goes out the window. And then we start to rely on what that fashion magazine says, or what, our mum says, or what this person says, or some, C-grade celebrity on Instagram. And, oh, right, there, we'll do that. And we kind of outsource it. And I was we got to own that. So yes, it starts always with consciousness. Everything is consciousness, because consciousness is the basis of everything. So this is why Ayurveda is very, very clear about this being one of the fundamental gateways in to staying well and having a quality of life that we all deserve. We must have that awareness.
Okay, so we've talked about the doshas. We have a little bit of the history. I think it'd be good to talk about eating and digestion, because I know you've mentioned that a few times, and that is actually, a central part of Ayurveda. Yes.
So let's just analyze this a little bit. In Ayurveda, we talk about digestion as Agni, Agni, Agni. Now, this is where we get our English word ignite, igneous in Latin. It's fire. Your digestion, think of your digestive system as a fire. And for a fire, we don't want it to be not burning very strongly. We want it to have some power, but we don't want it to be flaming hot and overdoing it. So we want to have good, strong, balanced, even digestion. Why? Why is this so important? We take in food. We consume that food and we metabolize it. We digest it. So there's the mechanism. We burn up the food in aid of assimilating that which is of value and nutritious and going to aid us, and releasing and getting rid of and eliminating that which is not. So the digestive process is key to this ability to ensure that we are gaining energy and we're gaining the right nutrients and minerals and everything that we need in a way that is not causing us to become out of balance. Now, what happens is if our digestion is not working well, if it's not fired up in a balanced way, we take in food, it doesn't get processed and digested in a good way. And we have a residue, we have a leftover. And in Ayurveda, this is called ama, A-M-A. And it is the byproduct of undigested food. What does ama look like? Well, this is the gunk that's on your tongue in the morning after a big late meal the night before. It is the stuff that clogs up the arteries. It is the stuff that gets into the joints and starts to create issues with the joints. Every aspect, all of the fine channels, the shrotas and the nadis of the channels of where the nutrients can flow, get blocked. And it affects our ability to transfer that goodness and that nutrition and that information to all parts of the body. And so it is the precursor, Ayurveda would say, ama, undigested food, is the precursor to all diseases. So it just makes me think, sorry to interrupt, it just makes me think about the Western diet that's evolved, and it's all around processed food and super processed food, and how that is just blocking up our whole system. Yeah, everybody's clogged up. So my top tip, Ayurvedic tip for unblocking this gunk, clearing this gunk out of your system, is to sip hot water every 30 minutes. So, I've got mine too. Yeah.
I drink hot water all day long because of you and Michael. It was like there's so many takeaways, but it really helps. I find I'm flush things through much quicker.
Yeah. You think about it. If you've got a drain that's all gunky, you're not going to put iced water down it. You put the hot water and it loosens, it lubricates, and it melts literally the armor out of the system. And here's the thing, and you know this from the part of the world that you come from, how people consume water and the kind of water they consume. Last time I was in the States, I asked for some water. Well, what did I get? I got a cup, literally, we were in Texas, it was this big, of ice. And then she plonks all this ice cold water on top of it. And I'm just like, ugh. Now, what is that doing to the fire, the digestive system, the Agni? That is like taking a bucket of ice cold water and plonking it on a fire. It's going to turn it, it's going to go. There's no fire, putting the digestive system out of action. So that means I then dump all of that ultra processed food, oriented towards sweet and salty, which is what a lot of the Western diet has as its qualities. And there's nothing to process it. Because interestingly, Ayurveda could say you could take anything, you could eat anything. If your digestion was fine and balanced, your system could handle it because you wouldn't create the armor. So this is why it's so important. So even if you were eating the crappiest kind of stuff that was out there, if your digestion was good, actually your system wouldn't be thrown off balance as much, and you wouldn't accumulate all of that armor in your system. But the hot water is actually lubricating and hydrating the internal organs and the systems. It's very good for the skin. It's incredibly important for the skin. We know that most people are chronically dehydrated. I see this time and time again when I'm teaching, meditation. As you know, it's a 4-day course. It's a couple of hours each day. And people will come along and I'll say, well, what are you noticing? In those first 4 days, I'll say, who's noticing that they're more thirsty? I kid you not, 8 out of 10 hands go up because, people are dehydrated and they are not drinking stuff that's actually going to hydrate the system at the deepest level. So my top tip, if somebody wants to do something that will immediately reduce puffiness, will immediately support the digestive system, improve their skin, improve going to the toilet, all of that stuff, which is so important, balance the vata, which most people, their vata is too sort of off the wired, then sip hot water. And people will say, well, can I put some lemon in it? Or, yeah, okay. In the beginning, yes, try it with a slice of lemon. I prefer lime, but if you put something in it, the best is to just have it with plain hot water. And it's not quantity, but it's the regularity of it. It's every half an hour. That's why I have this, because then I just have it there and I just take a few sips. And it's a really simple, doable, game-changing.
And why, if someone did want to flavor it, why lime over lemon? Does that have to do with the acidity?
Yes, and it's just better for all the doshas, so it's I would prefer that. But people will say, oh, can I have herbal tea? Well, as my Vaidya said, if you're going to clean your hands, you're not going to wash them in herbal tea. You're going to wash them in water. It's fine to have herbal tea. It's just the preference would be to go for hot water plain. And what people find, and this because you're living in a warm climate, it's kind of, you think, oh, that's counterintuitive. I'm in a hot place. I want a cold drink. Yes, if it was the middle of August in the Northern Hemisphere and it was, in a heat wave and you want to cool the system, but actually the most rapid hydration is going to come from room temperature and above, not from ice cold.
Yeah. So if people aren't necessarily willing to have hot water, even just having room temperature is better than having ice cold.
Ditch the ice.
Yeah. Ditch the ice. Ditch the ice.
I've got one message for you. Do not drink or eat icy cold foods and drinks.
Can we talk a little bit about spices? Because I know, there are some spices that are good for us that we could be introducing to help with inflammation or for digestion in general.
Yes, and I think, one of the top ones is ginger. It's like kindling on the fire. So, if you were feeling like your digestive system was a bit sluggish, you were having trouble sort of digesting and maybe, just feeling a bit sluggish in your system generally, then putting some slices of fresh ginger into your flask or into your cup and the hot water and just letting that steep and then sipping that is a really good way to ignite the digestive system. Be careful about that when you're in a hot climate. If your tendency is already towards pitta and you have a lot in your system already, but that's something. And so using that when you're cooking, you're doing a stir fry, some grated ginger in there, or a soup, or be very good. It's a very good way to ensure that you can sort of grate some ginger, put some lime juice on it and a pinch of salt and sort of nibble that before a meal. And that will really kickstart the digestive system. Again, just be careful you're not doing that if there's already too much heat in the environment and the system itself.
Okay.
So that's one.
Just a question on that, because so my ankles were really swollen yesterday and I had some ginger in my hot water because I was like, well, they're inflamed. Maybe that's going to help my ankles. Is that totally crazy? Does it help other inflammation as well?
Yes. Yeah. Because if there's buildup in the system, there's sluggishness, there's something that's not flowing. Yes, as long as the system isn't overheating, and you're not feeling like there's already too much heat in the system. Yes. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
we've got ginger. One of my absolute favorite things to cook with, I make my own, although it's very easy to get these days, is to cook with ghee. Ghee is, some people will know it as clarified butter. And it is very good for cholesterol. It's very good for digestion. It's very good for brain, for eyes. It's if I'm stir frying vegetables or I'll put it in my rice when I'm putting it in the rice cooker. I will always use ghee where I can because it has such a good effect on joints, muscles, everything. It's a highly, highly prized ingredient and I wouldn't have it, not have it in my kitchen.
Why is that? Why is it so good? Why is it so good for us?
What we do, the way we make ghee is we heat butter. And what happens is that all of the heavy aspects of the butter, of the dairy product, separates and you're left, or you heat it over a long period of time at a low heat, and it takes off all of that heavy, hard to digest element, and you're left with this clear, pure golden ghee. And so we don't put it in the fridge, we just leave it. I have it there by my stove. It doesn't go rancid or anything, but it's taking away that heavy, hard to digest component out of the butter. And so you don't burn it. If you're frying something, it won't burn. Whereas if you cooked with butter, it would burn. So it has a lot of very positive and would be regarded as a rasayana in Ayurveda, as a carrier for a lot of herbs. There's a herbal preparation that I take and that I mix in with ghee, and it actually is going through the system as a carrier. So it's very, very, very good thing to add in.
And so then when you have that as the carrier, does it then draw out the impurities through your system?
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are different approaches to the various purification programs in Ayurveda. The culmination of all of that is a program called Panchakarma, which is something that I do on a regular basis, where you go through a number of purification treatments and a program. And often when you do that, there will be a component in that preparatory stage where you're trying to draw the toxins and the impurities out of the system, where ghee will be used to literally do that, to oleate and to loosen and draw out the toxins into the gut, and then they are removed from there. Yeah. Very good.
I would love to just hear just a little bit, since we're talking about eating and digestion, just that concept of fasting and how that supports the system.
Fasting gives the digestive system a break, and it allows for things to reset. It has to be done with care. I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment around intermittent fasting. And I think the thing that I would highlight that's very important from an Ayurvedic perspective is not just what we eat, but when we eat. As important, how we eat is also as important as what we eat. And so I said earlier, you could be eating something not too great, but if your digestive system was good and you were settled and you weren't stressed and you were eating at the right time of the day, you'd probably be, it wouldn't have such a damaging effect on the system. And I think this is an important thing that really relates to our lifestyle in the West, because what often happens, and I observe this a lot, is that people will kind of eat lightly during the day. They're probably busy. They might be eating something while they're sitting at their computer doing stuff, so they're distracted. They are kind of grabbing at various things and snacking. And then they sit down and they have their main meal in the evening, quite late, relatively late. And Ayurveda would say that this is not such a recommended thing to do. And again, it comes back to that point that I made earlier. We want to be in alignment with nature. And we have Agni, we have fire, our digestion. Well, there's also a fire in nature. And the greatest fire in nature is the sun. And when we're in alignment with that, when we are digesting at a time when nature is also, the fire in nature is at the strongest, then our digestion will be strongest, will be most balanced. So this is why Ayurveda would recommend that you eat your main meal of the day between 12:30 and 2 p.m. You don't eat your main meal at 8:30 at night, because your digestive system is really on the low down then. It's like it's not firing. And so then you dump a whole lot of food in your system, and maybe food that's quite hard to digest, maybe meat, maybe heavy cheeses, maybe yogurt, all this stuff that's actually really hard for the body to process. And then you got to try and sleep. That's going to be affected. And then you haven't digested that food, and then all of that armor has been created in the system. So this is something to take into account, I don't personally eat that much at night. I'll have breakfast and then I'll have a good lunch, but I'm not interested in loading a whole lot of food generally. If I go out to somebody's place or I'm in a business event or something and I have to, then I have to. My system can handle it. But as a rule, do I want to be sitting down and having my main meal too late? No, for this reason. And I think that's a really important thing from an Ayurvedic perspective, this connection with nature and this alignment with the natural rhythms. When is the best time to wake up? When is the best time to go to sleep? Well, our Western society has everybody awake and on screens at times of the very late night and early morning that are not in alignment with nature. And then, sleeping in and feeling heavy and sluggish because we're waking up at a time of the day which is kapha dominant. There's the heaviness. 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. is the kapha phase of the day. So you wake up at 9 a.m., you think, oh, I've had a sleep in, but actually you're kind of heavy and it takes you a while to get going. You will have more energy if you wake up at 6 a.m. because from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. is the vata part of the morning, and that's light and and movement and energy and, you know, flow. And so we notice that in terms of our energy. So it's just all these different elements to consider. Now, from that middle part of the day is the pitta phase of the day. That's the metabolism. That's the digestion. That's when it's going to be most strongest and balanced. So that's something that if people were looking again to make a relatively simple and doable shift, eat more at lunchtime, eat less at night. You know, so if you're going to a business meeting and you have to sit down and eat something at night, just go for soup, go for something light, go for vegetarian, go for, you know, just make the choices that will support that as best you can. Because, you know, these things can really have a big impact in our life. We don't want to get neurotic about it, and we don't want to get stressed about it. And simple things that are practical, having that knowledge will allow you to make choices that will actually support your system. And then when that self-awareness starts to get stronger, then when something's off, you feel it and you notice it and you can catch it earlier. You know, so much of our Western allopathic medical system is geared around dealing with stuff at an incredibly late stage of its development.
Yeah. And we also look at the symptoms rather than what's the root cause and why is this actually happening? Something
that would have been building up for years.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because also, one, I've changed my whole eating at night. Like we want to sit down for a family dinner, but we just eat really early now. Yeah. And I know those times, like last night we went out to dinner. I'm not going to say no to a dinner because I actually still want to be able to go out and enjoy myself. But I could feel this morning, oh, wow, we ate later. It was a little bit heavier on my stomach. I ate a vegetarian meal, but it was later and it impacted my sleep. Yeah. And I woke up just feeling a little bit like, ooh, my body felt different. And just having that awareness, okay, I know what it was from, but also I had a nice time and it was fun. So in a sense, it was worth it, but my body did feel the difference this morning.
Yes. And I think then it's about, okay, of course, you want to be engaged in life and you want to enjoy yourself. And the answer is not to kind of turn into some weirdo that, you know, you're sitting around eating dal, you know, every meal and not going anywhere. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And what you noted was, oh, you know, when I did that, I felt like that. Okay, I can connect the dots. I know why. And now what do I do about it? Well, today I'm going to get back into sync. I'm going to make sure that I've got a little bit of, you know, ginger in my hot water. I'm going to add a bit of cumin seeds to my stir-fried vegetables just to help with the digestive system. I'm going to make sure that I have a good sit-down lunch. I'm not going to eat much tonight. You know, I'm going to give my system a break. So I think back to your question about fasting, I think, yes, and fasting, if done properly and in a considered way, can help the system. And the reason we do it is to really give the digestive system a break so that it can continue to function in a very strong way. So yeah. It has its
purposes, but to do it in the right way. Yeah. We have obviously a lot of busy professionals and senior leaders in their fields, and many are burnt out or on the verge of burnout. What are, aside from hot water and, you know, looking at their digestion, what are some things, how could they apply Ayurveda to support them?
Well, a lot of these people, and I work with many of them myself, do have a tendency to be awake early. You know, they can be kind of early risers, and that I always recommend. What they often, there's a little bit of a kind of a poo-pooing of resting, and you know, it's sleep is sort of, well, you know, I don't need much. I'm a bit of a, you know, superstar because I can get by with 4 hours or I can get by with 5 hours. And I would say, you know, resting is one of the most valuable activities that you can do, because the rest is the funding mechanism for everything that you do. And I think orienting your system so that you are waking early and going to bed a bit earlier and having better sleep hygiene is certainly something that is going to give you more energy and more longevity over time and more optimization of brain functioning. Of course, with my meditation hat on, I would say they need to be meditating because they need to be getting rid of stress and fatigue out of the system. And the science is unambiguous. You know, if you're not meditating, you're going to be more tired, you're going to be less able to make good decisions, and you will age more quickly. So it's very clear. And I've written a whole book about it. People can, you know, the evidence is there. It's a no-brainer. I think favoring food that is easy to digest. So, you know, I'm not saying, oh, right, you know, now I'm into Ayurveda and I've got to drop all of the meat and everything. It's understanding a little bit about what is involved for the nervous system. And certainly, you know, we're in an age where everybody's talking about, you know, the value of having raw food. And I think it's something to be very careful about. Ayurveda would say that raw food for most people to the degree that they're consuming it, whether it be a raw juice or it be raw salads, depending on your climate and where you are, it can be quite hard for the digestive system and create a lot of toxicity. Now, if somebody has a lot of kapha and they're finding it difficult to lose weight, then that would need to be adjusted. But for most people, they have a tendency towards vata being out of balance. Vata is the dosha that gets thrown out of balance. And many of these high performers are traveling a lot. And travel is the first thing to throw vata out. They're working long hours, intense mental activity. So there is this a lot of time on screens. And so you just need to be able to get this resting right and support the digestion by not overdoing it. And the raw food is something that will aggravate the system and become quite toxic and create quite a lot of armor. So I would caution people around that.
So just like the dumping of cold ice water on your system, the raw food does a similar thing.
Yeah, it hasn't been cooked. Now people will say, well, what about fruit? Well, fruit's been cooked. It's right. The sun has cooked it, you know, so yes, you can eat it. The body can handle it. But, you know, taking a whole lot of kale and dumping it into a NutriBullet and whizzing it up and throwing a bit of, you know, almond butter and whatever else is going on and expecting your system to process all of that, it's asking a lot. So, you know, that is something I would be paying attention to, and having that main meal at lunchtime. Have a good lunch. Organize your schedule so that you can do that. And then, you know, when you're traveling, really, you know, having access to, you know, that hot water. And this thing, I take this and I put some slices of ginger in it, and then you take that through security because you're not allowed any, and then fill it up with hot water on the other side, and you've got something to help you when you're flying. So there's lots of little tricks like that. But I think getting good rest is really important. And so looking at that, rising early is paying attention. Ayurveda would say, well, actually 10 p.m. is starting to be good sleep time. If we're not getting to sleep before midnight, there are vital metabolic processes that are not getting attended to in the system because we're up and we're doing whatever we're doing. So just, you know, if there has to be some work in the evening, do it a bit earlier, but allow there to be a buffer zone between that and some downtime.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I mean, I could keep talking to you forever and asking questions. I feel like we've gone pretty deep into digestion, touching on sleep, and there's a lot of knowledge that you've passed on that I know that our audience will get a lot out of. I'm feeling like we need to have a second episode.
As we said, Ayurveda's got something to say about everything.
Well, it's like peeling back an onion, right? You peel back one layer and you realize how that's sort of linked to something else, to something else, something else. So, I mean, it's fascinating, but this concept of like the knowledge of life, and it is a whole lifestyle, but you don't have to kill yourself to get into it all at once. Like,
yes, and I think, anytime we feel like we're heading in the direction of weirdness, we should really pay attention, because who wants that? There's nothing attractive about that. We have to be practical and relevant and what works for you. But I think, just some very simple things, and start to research. If this has resonated for somebody, you're listening to this and you think, gosh, there's something about this that sounds, I'd like to know more, then start doing some research, because there's just a wealth of really good, simple, practical things that we can do without going full blown, Ayurveda, that is not actually doable. And then it just creates more stress.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking your time and for sharing all your insight and wisdom into Ayurveda. And we will definitely link up your book. I've shared it with our audience already, and they have your piece on why meditate. And I can't recommend it enough to other people outside of our audience. So thank you for
great advertisement for all of this. And it's wonderful that you're bringing this knowledge out in a way that is accessible, and this is the key. There's so much there that's of value and that can just enhance all the other good stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, we live in modern society. It's not like we're in a mountain and living out of a cave. Like, how can we actually apply all of this knowledge into everyday life, but not get too overwhelmed that we're not doing it all the time perfectly? That's just not realistic.
Yeah, and the moment we start sort of beating ourselves up, then, it defeats the whole purpose. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining us. I am really grateful for your time. And for all of you out there, be here and be well.
Bye.